All right, you guys. Sit rep for June 29th, 2025. Definitely no end in sight. Although in between last week and sit rep and this week, the war between Israel and Iran ended and the US intervention happened. The US intervention happened and the war ended all between the last two sit reps. So I'll spend some time tonight debriefing that war. We'll do our roundup of what we think the war means and what happened and how it ended. I will not be doing the if Iran genre, but we are analysts here. We're trying to explain and understand what happened, not give advice that is not going to be listened to by anyone, since why would they take advice from random people on the internet? Nonetheless, you guys are here and I am here, and we have no choice but to try to make sense of what's going on. So that's what we'll do. Let's start in Gaza, though. The Israelis are drugging, they're inserting opiates into the food. This is one of the sickest things, but what can we what can we not what can we not believe? What depravity, what evil can they commit in the open that would be too much for us to believe possible? What could they lie about? What atrocity could they commit? They're drugging the food and they're daily killing about 100 people, most of whom are being murdered at these aid sites run by the Global Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. You might have seen the old white guy in the military outfit, something in Kemp or something, I think is his name, and he was explaining how, don't believe it, we're feeding people here. Which also, why do you need to feed people? Why can't they feed themselves? Why did you destroy all of their food and agricultural sources, and why can't they trade with the outside world? Why do you have to be feeding them? But anyway, he says we're feeding them, and there's nothing to see here. And in the background, you can actually hear gunfire. So they're just brazen lies, the most creative, inventive atrocities and crimes, just the vilest things. These are the absolute lowest humanity has sunk to, and they're going lower. So there was a story that I saw where and I didn't fully understand it, but it was something about how the Gaza clans, the important families, which I guess are not necessarily affiliated with the government per se, the municipal government or the ministries that have been running Gaza, i.e., Hamas, not just Hamas, but Hamas is the party that has been governing Gaza and pretty well organized in terms of governance. But of course, you're not allowed to say that. You have to. We have to take care of the feelings of the people who are genociding Gaza, and they don't want to ever hear anything about how municipal governance or territorial governance might actually be reasonably well functioning, or have been, until the Israelis have been doing this genocide and specifically targeting all possible organization, social organization, political and bureaucratic organization that Gaza had. The clans, these families, they announced that they had managed to secure the delivery of aid to the north, and kind of basically saying that they had somehow defeated the mechanism that the Israelis had put in place for looting, and the Abu Shabab gang, and the looting and the whole system they have to starve people and then massacre them at these GHF sites. When I read that, I thought, I was worried, because as nice as it is that they got some aid in, if the genociders, the people that are in charge of whether people in Gaza have food or not, are the people that are murdering them. It's the Israelis that everybody in the West has anyway accepted, and good parts of the rest of the world have accepted that the Israelis get to be in charge of aid distribution for the people that they're murdering. And it's not that the Israelis are providing the aid, far from it. It's just that the Israelis decide whether it gets to go in or not. And they're still claiming safety considerations. And we'll talk a bit about safety too a little bit later, but they're still citing these things that they get to decide who starves. And lots of babies, 60 babies, I think, starved this week to death. And that's the system. That's the system that we have in place. We have people in charge in the West, and we have people in charge in Gaza, I should say, of the people in Gaza, and they have absolute authority over what we're allowed to say and what we're allowed to talk to each other about. And they have absolute authority over whether people in Gaza live or die. And we're not allowed to say anything about it or talk about it or be upset about that, because it might offend their feelings, their precious feelings. So while they're in charge, nothing that plans or the government of that's in place in Gaza, Hamas, nothing that they can do to secure aid into Gaza can ever stick, because if it does, if people start receiving regular food, the Israelis will attack that system. They'll bomb it. They'll, attack it with drones and missiles and their air force, attack the distribution sites and attack on the ground too. They specialize in attacking non-military targets. Their military avoids fighting and tries to attack civilians at hospitals, especially hospitals. And so ultimately, this securing of aid lasted a very short time before the Israelis found a countermeasure. This is what the Israelis are really good at, developing countermeasures to things like hospitals and schools and food distribution. So again, there is nothing more repugnant to the human conscience than what is happening here. There's nothing more vile, no, actually vile, not hypothetically or feelings wise, but actually, this is actual evil that is unfolding. And it's really important to keep that in mind when precious Western feelings and precious tears are being shed about things people said at a concert or about things people didn't say, like Mamdani. We'll get to that in another little minute or two. This week, I saw a lot of mourning. You guys probably saw the funeral, again, out of order here, because we are going to talk about the war on Iran and how it ended. But there was a big funeral, I think, yesterday for all of the Iranian senior military staff that were murdered in the first day of Israel's surprise attack. A surprise attack, an undeclared war, and assassinations. So among them was a major general named Mohammed Saeed Izadi, and he was also known as Hajj Ramadan to the people in Gaza. He was the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, Republican Guard Corps, IRGC, their Palestine file. And he died in the war. I guess he was one of the people that was assassinated in the war. So there were a lot of tributes that I read to him from the Palestinian resistance, because he was the one he was, I guess, their liaison. Um, you guys probably also saw the footage of the Palestinian resistance fighter throwing a really big device, the Shawat device. John has talked about this Shawat device, explosive penetrating bomb, or yeah, I guess it's a bomb. I mean, it creates this copper plate. Anyway, it was thrown into an open, what do you call it, cockpit? No, I can't remember what it's called. The 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 thing you climb in and out of in the tank. And it was thrown into there, and I think half a dozen or a dozen Israeli soldiers were inside, nine of them, I think, and it was burning. They had to tow the vehicle while it was burning back to Israel. And they've tried to create some countermeasures to that kind of operation by putting like a chain link cage over their tanks now, if they have them. Not sure that that'll work, but anyway, it's that was one of the most, again, in a war that has furnished one unbelievably unreal display of courage, I guess you could say, in terms of military guerrilla feats, warfare. After another, this was just another 2 years in, you can still see something that is totally not, doesn't seem humanly possible at all. So that was, if you followed Gaza, there were some major operations against Israeli soldiers and a lot of what the Israelis call difficult security incidents, especially around Khan Yunis. So as there's fighting in Khan Yunis, and there's especially stepped up aid food massacres of starving people, especially focused more in the south in Rafah. So those are the dynamics in Gaza right now. And I expect those to continue. There's no reason to think those will stop over the coming week. Lebanon, assassinations of Hezbollah figures, of civilians, bombings, huge bombings for the past few days. As soon as the not peace, as soon as the cessation of hostilities went through in Iran, the Israelis stepped up their bombing elsewhere. There was a speech from the Secretary General of Hezbollah, Qassem, and he said he basically said, I read it as a kind of we're running out of patience kind of message. He said the ceasefire is the responsibility of the Lebanese state. But he also rhetorically asked, do you imagine we will remain silent forever? And he said, whenever there is a weak party, it means that Israel will expand and take everything. Yemen was launching missiles into Israel while throughout the war between Iran and Yemen. They also said, our deal with the Americans. They said our deal with the Americans is also off. We will be attacking Americans if they come into range again. And I guess they didn't, so it didn't practically come up. The Americans, when they did bomb Iran, they flew from the continental US, if I understand correctly, the events. No one knows for sure what of that actually happened, but according to the reports, the Americans flew from the US all the way to Iran, bombed Iran, and flew back home. Aerial refueling being a key to all of these operations over Iran, and a complicating factor for the Americans if they want to go back into this war in a bigger way later. So the other thing to note about Yemen is they are hitting targets that they hadn't hit before, but which Iran hit during the war. So that's kind of interesting. Like Beersheeba, the last missile that Yemen launched hit Beersheeba, which was not a target that was on Yemen's target list, but which was one of the places that were hit pretty hard in the last Iranian salvo of missiles. So that's just make of that what you want. I don't know what to make of it, except clearly the Yemenis were watching, and maybe there were some targets that they didn't want to, that they partially destroyed that they wanted to make sure were completely destroyed. Sorry about that. It's late night here, as you probably know. These are late night sit reps when everybody in the house is asleep. That's the best I can do for you. I know some of you have complained, not you guys, but people have complained about my yawning or my less than energetic delivery at times. Uh, some people take the positive side of that and say that it's calm. I am a bit more energetic during the day. Perhaps I'm mellow during the day too. Anyway, so I wanted to talk about um, two things unrelated to the military sphere. I'd argue it's still in my lane because it's politics and war is politics by other means. So I want to talk about Zohran Mamdani. He won the Democratic primary for the mayor of New York after a whole bunch of people in every forum asking him if Israel has the right to exist as a Jewish state. And he wouldn't say that Israel has the right to exist as a Jewish state. He did say Israel has the right to exist as a state with equal rights for everybody, which is fine. A lot of people would say, that, but like, it's not strictly true, right? States don't have a right to exist. The whole rhetorical construction, does Israel have a right to exist? Do you think Israel has a right to exist? This is all just bullying. It's all just Zionist bullying. There's no time for it anymore. These people are committing a genocide. You don't have to answer their questions. Of course, he has to answer their questions, which is part of why we're talking about him. Um, he calls it a genocide, which is good. But he's endorsed by AOC, he's endorsed by Bernie Sanders. So I'll just say a little bit briefly about this. I just have 2 points. One point is he going to be a co-opter? Is he going to try to co-opt and de-energize and ultimately demobilize Palestine solidarity that he kind of gestures to when he says he's not going to go to Israel and that Israel is committing a genocide and that Israel should give equal rights to all people, including Palestinians. And the answer to that is yes, of course he's gonna co-opt the movement and demobilize them and try to create a bunch of disillusioned people who have nowhere to go. That is what he's in the Democratic Party, people. That is what the Democratic Party is for. As so many people have noted, AOC, Bernie Sanders, we've seen this over, and Obama himself, we've seen this over and over again. This is what they're for. This is what they do. This is what they exist to do. So the point of this is, uh, you take the Democratic Party and there's something happening politically that could challenge the system conceivably at some point. And the Democratic Party must absorb that and absorb it like a bacteria or a T cell would absorb a virus or a bacteria and absorb it and destroy it. That's what the Democratic Party does. It's the immune system. It's the immune cells of the US imperialist corporate system. It is the immune system that goes and eats uh, viruses and bacteria, the virus of solidarity, the virus of human decency, the virus of um, wanting to stop a genocide or wanting groceries that people need not have to starve while they work in New York, or people being able to afford living in the city that they work in. These ideas, when they're popular, And if a large number of people adopt them and there's no outlet for them in the political system, those people will do things that are unpredictable and that are potentially very destabilizing. And the best possible counterinsurgency is to pick off the leaders of that movement, which was absolutely done during Black Lives Matter. The leaders of that movement were murdered by police in very you know, mysterious circumstances in some cases, and very showy, like fairly obvious what the police how the police murdered these people. And then, but you'll never know. You'll never know that it was the police for sure. So the police are there to do that work, but the masses are not pacified in that way. The potential leaders are killed. The masses are brought in to the Democratic Party by signaling that they're open to this. And then when it comes time to um, capitulate, to kiss the Israeli ring, um, to vote for repression, to vote for um, funding genocide, these Democratic politicians will always do it. And they'll go and 99% of them will applaud for Netanyahu, and then one of them will be allowed to carry a little sign saying, I don't approve of this. So the like what Mamdani, you just have to understand what he's there to do. What he's there to do is that the structural point of Mamdani is that he is the AOC of 2025. He is there to absorb the Palestine solidarity energy that is outside, that has been outcast by the entire establishment, and to absorb those people who can be absorbed and fragment that movement and make sure that it doesn't establish an independent source of power, become an independent source of power, an independent pole. So absorb it into the Democratic Party and then destroy it. Corbyn and Labour, that's what they did. It doesn't really matter whether Zohran Mamdani survives this process politically or not. He could, by becoming like AOC, a useless kind of figure, which is what I think, because he's just so charming and he's likable. So he's gonna stick around. Or maybe, and even Corbyn was allowed to stick around, just not as leader, right, of the Labour Party. So Corbyn is still there. He's still a nice guy. People really like him, but his movement was simultaneously absorbed. They did a beautiful job. They absorbed them, they used them, and then they sort of destroyed them as an organized political voice. And now which actually brings us to England. No, I can't. I said I would make 2 points about Zohran Mamdani. So that's number one. The second point, though, is that whatever he is, and you can agree with me or not about what he is, I'm going to agree with you that this is a sign that of where public opinion is again in America. In this city that's, like, I'm told, one of the biggest, I've been to New York a bunch of times. I love New York. It's a fascinating place, but this city that, has the most Jewish people outside of Israel, right? It's a and yet this city full of Jewish people, including lots of these Jewish people, voted for Mamdani in the primary, and he's endorsed by Jewish people all over the place, and so public opinion, democratic opinion, in the sense of the Democratic Party, is doesn't want politicians who kiss the genocide state's ring. Let's use that word. And he, just by saying he would stay in New York and not go on a trip to Israel as his first trip, he made absolute fools out of all 13 other candidates. They all looked like fools. And just by saying, he wants equal rights, he made them look like fools. But so it actually is an electoral asset to be anti-genocide, and it was an electoral asset to be anti-genocide for Zohran Mamdani. So whatever he is and he does, and the Democratic Party uses him to do structurally, the point is that there is this body of opinion which is anti-genocide, and it is getting more anti-genocide, and they're not people are not impressed. You can't just scream that somebody's anti-Semitic and destroy their career anymore. So they're going to have to get a little more creative, which I'm sure they do. They will. But again, I don't know that the point is, some of them want to destroy his career for sure, and others want to use him, and others want to use him to co-opt. And co-optation and character assassination, they all proceed at the same time. They all proceed at the same time. This is the nature of what the Black Alliance for Peace, I think the Black Agenda report, they called sheepdogging, right? The people, we the people are the sheep, and the sheepdogs are the Bernie Sanders, the AOCs, and now Zohran Mamdani. And they're herding us back to the pen where we can't make any difference politically on the situation. So now we can go back to England, because we talked about the comparison with Corbyn and how he was slowly picked to pieces by the pro-Israel forces in Britain. You've all probably seen Bob Vylan, the band, and the chant "Death, Death to the IDF," which was immediately chanted by 200,000 people on BBC. You saw that BBC was trying to stop this Irish band, Kneecap, who had said, and for Free Palestine kind of oriented musical acts, and they for that reason BBC knew to not show them on TV. And meanwhile, then Bob Vylan, who had also said similar things at Coachella, I remember seeing footage from Coachella from this Bob Vylan saying Free Palestine, etc. And Bob Vylan took us up a notch from Free Palestine to Death to the IDF, which, unpacking is an interesting one, because he didn't say, all the things he didn't say, and so he didn't say death to Israel even, which is something that lots of people chant in different parts of the world, especially parts of the world that are affected by Israel, or especially connected to the genocide that Israel is committing. But death to the IDF, I mean, it's an interesting one, because now the West is, and Britain in particular, is in this position of persecuting people for this chant, uh, against a military that's actually committing genocide, and they're doing it basically to show that the genocidal military is a protected class, and protected not from physical action against them solely, but protected from chants. So the chant might hurt the feelings of the Israeli army, and so the people who chant it must be punished according to British law, to the fullest extent of British law. So that this is unfolding in an interesting way, but in terms of bellwethers, in terms of what it means for where politics is going and where culture is going, I think if anything, like the chant that Bob Vylan adopted and that people chanted along to and now are chanting all over the world and are posting all over the internet is an even bigger sign of opinion and where it's headed, even in the West, compared to Zohran Mamdani's election. Not that, not that I mean, that happened in the same week. And I think it's not unrelated entirely to what happened in the war between Israel and Iran, which I'm going to get to. I just wanted to conclude this section on Western opinion and where things are going. It's a real slippage of what, Caitlin Johnstone would call narrative control. Nobody has any time for this anymore. Nobody has any patience for these feelings of these genociders and their supporters, and the idea that we're supposed to be solicitous of their feelings while they're genociding and supporting all of these atrocities that we're seeing unfolding all the time and with no end in sight, and with them perfectly happy to have these go on forever. And Bob Vylan also said this. He said, we're not pacifist punks, we're violent punks, because unfortunately some people only understand that language. And that is also a transcending of what I've argued is a totally ahistorical and falsified history and data suggesting that nonviolence has any meaningful political effect. In the anti-colonial context, it has not. It does not. And I've written about it on Substack, and you can look that up. I've written about the India and civil rights U.S. cases, which were violent movements, and which nonviolence played a very contradictory part, not as it's presented. So I'm not going to rehash all of that here, but I just wanted to say that Bob Vylan, in addition to the new chant, but have you heard this one, as he said, he also specifically referred to, they also specifically rebutted nonviolence doctrine and pacifism. So it's all a sign, I think, of people reaching the limits of what they can tolerate in terms of watching this genocide with no end in sight. And so people want to say something, even if they're suppressed, and people want to do something, even if there are going to be consequences. And that's going to happen more and more, I think. How could it not? So the war, so started on June 13th with all of these assassinations, and I believe I reported a couple of days later as it was starting, and I met, that initial period, that initial horrified period of assassinations before Iran recovered, and then Iran started to recover and get back into the fight. And out there, you probably have seen several different opinions. Julian McFarlane, who writes a Substack, and who I respect, he argued that Iran should have continued for a week after the Israelis asked for the ceasefire and Trump declared it. You've probably seen other people say Iran should not have stopped. Iran should have hit the base harder. And then you've seen probably Laith Marouf, who's been on this podcast or on this channel a couple of times, and Ali Abunimah from Electronic Intifada, who I've talked to on their channel, and who I know almost all of you here know, Electronic Intifada, they argued that no, and Morandi, Professor Mohammed Morandi, who has also been on this channel and on EI, and they all argued, and they all their opinions are I take very seriously on all of these matters. They argued no, Iran has to consider. Morandi put it this way. Morandi said we had to consider what we would get for more bombing. We would be losing more lives in 13 days or 12 days. The Israelis killed almost 1,000, I think about 1,000 Iranians, mostly civilians, children. They target children, playgrounds, schools, same thing they do everywhere. And as Morandi put it, he said, well, we had to consider like what we were going to get for those lives. And Ali Abunimah, he said in a blog post on Electronic Intifada, he said very likely the the U.S. after that initial bunker busting extravaganza, and for bunker busting, I would highly recommend Ted Postol. I've been following his work for decades. Postol. He's like a retired MIT prof, specialist in all kinds of weapons, and very technical weapons kind of expert. And Postol on the channel Dialogue Works, but on other channels too. I think there's a Daniel something. There's a another American ex-military guy who interviews Postol, and so look for Ted Postol on this. But um, after that bunker busting day, that where Trump said they attacked these three sites and destroyed them in the most beautiful destruction, greatest thing like you've never seen before, etc. Um, Iran hit the Qatar base, and then they said, okay, if you don't hit us anymore, we won't hit you anymore. And if Israel doesn't bomb us anymore, we won't bomb them anymore. And as Ali Abunimah put it, if they had kept going, that would have the next thing that would have happened was the Americans would have done a strategic bombing campaign on Tehran. So, in addition to all of the bombing on that the Israelis would have done, the Americans would have added their B-2s and their B-52s and all of their massive ground attack aircraft, which some of which might have gotten shot down, sure, but again, that maybe thousands more Iranians would have died, and then what? Like, does that end? Um, the war in which Iran closes the Straits of Hormuz, it destroys all the American bases with missiles and also continues to pound Israel. That war is also, and I don't doubt that Iran can do all of those things, especially now, but that will also destroy large parts of Tehran and kill thousands upon thousands of Iranians. And so the decision to avoid that or maybe defer that, as Morandi said, the strategy was never to destroy Israel and American bases and Iran all in one blaze of glory. This is not his exact words by any stretch, but he basically said that the strategy is actually, and Laith says something similar, to make the war go longer, um, so that it doesn't have to be one big mutual destruction kind of situation, but instead, um, over time, the Israelis lose a reason to fight because there's no reason for them to be there. They're not accomplishing anything there anymore because they can't bring their neighbors to submission. They can't have the masses of Israelis can't have normal lives. They can't have normal lives anymore. All they can do is continue to invade and murder and genocide, while the American bombs and the Turkish food and the Azerbaijani fuel all comes to them via Jordan. etc. So if all they can do is commit more and more genocide, and their soldiers go and get blown up in Gaza periodically while they're committing these genocides, and and they go and fight Iran, and Iran blows up their headquarters, their Mossad headquarters, their Unit 8200 headquarters, their Nevatim air base, and Iran just destroys all of these things. And the Yemenis are launching a hypersonic missile every day or so, a ballistic missile every day or so. That's not a normal life. That's not normal. And so, for the masses of Israelis who wanted to enjoy a Western lifestyle on the beaches of the Middle East, that's over. That's not happening. And if they go and murder another 500,000 Palestinians, they're still not gonna have any normalcy for their masses. They're psychopaths, of which there are many, can continue the project of what Israel actually is, which is a project of dropping American-made bombs on Palestinian children. That's what Israel is primarily about now. But as this drags on for years, is that going to be enough for Israelis who have other options for building their lives? Is that going to be enough for them? And that's the kind of calculation that the resistance would rather work off of than let's all blow everything up at once and have nuclear bombs dropped on the capitals of the region and conventional missiles destroy the nuclear facilities at Dimona in Israel, etc. It's to be avoided, if possible. And it's not entirely up to Iran, obviously. It's up to the psychopaths that are running Israel and the US right now, in large part. But whatever can make them hesitate to do that should definitely be done. On the other hand, it is not over. Um, and the Israelis are trying to get back into the war. And if you watch Professor Morandi's Twitter feed, he says he's warned multiple times. He said they're on the verge of doing it again, and they're going to pay even worse this time, which is also what the Ayatollah Khamenei said, and others who speak for Iran have said that the next time Iran has no reason to restrain themselves. The Americans have already entered the war, and Iran's doctrine is very much tit for tat, right? You hit us hard, we hit you hard. You stop, we stop. So if you know game theory, if you followed the Rand Corporation's Cold War nuclear disarmament game theory, tit for tat is the optimal, mathematically speaking, strategy for de-escalating from a nuclear war scenario. So Iran maybe read that. They have a lot of engineers and mathematicians and scientists in Iran, so they might have done the math themselves. That's how they play. Now, I want to say something that I mentioned in my latest Substack, which was polarizing. If you guys want to read it and join the active comment section, but I mentioned this, that Israel has this penchant for spectacular attacks, undeclared spectacular attacks. So the pager attack is one. The assassinations on June 13th of the Iranian commanders was another. These are operations that take years to set up, and presumably the Iranian assassinations took years to set up. And they have other hallmarks too. They're low tech, relatively low tech, but they used the fact that the Western supply chain is completely open to them and they can go anywhere and do anything they want. without anyone ever scrutinizing them because they, own they own the world and we're just inhabiting it uh, for them to commit genocide in. So um, so what they do is they do spectacular attacks using supply chains, spies, lots of spies, right? Spy networks, building them up over a long period of time. And they're always assassinations. And they want to assassinate more people. And they're always trying to assassinate. So, and there's a book by Ronan Bergman, who we've mentioned a lot over the years on this channel, because he's like an Israeli spokesman who's also a journalist. So he has all this access to the Israeli military establishment. He wrote a long article about October 7th and all the Hannibal Directive of October 7th months ago. John and I talked about it here. I don't know, a year ago. Time is a bit of a blur now. But he has a book about Israel's assassination policy, and he estimates that they've assassinated, I don't know, 3,000 people or something over the years. Assassination is what they do. And this is what I wanted to say. Iran has this specialty in missiles to such an extent that like they don't even have a great fighter aircraft. Their fighter aircraft that they had was from the Shah era in the 70s, and they have these old fighter aircraft that are multiple generations behind. And the Israelis went and blew them up and thought that was an accomplishment, but they were not even trying to fly them. But the Israelis do have fighters. Well, they have the American fighters and the American bombers and the American aircraft, and they like to bomb from the air. But the Iranians were shooting down drones towards the end. Lots of Israeli drones were shot down. The American drones were being shot down over Yemen, if you remember. You haven't heard of that happening too much recently because they're not doing it anymore. They're not flying those drones to get shot down anymore. So the Iranians are shooting down the drones. They said they were shooting down the F-35s too. The F-35s are shooting from Iraq, apparently. They're not flying into Iran. So the air defense of Iran actually is pretty good, I think. And it could get better. But I've heard people say, oh, the air defense of Iran was bad. And I didn't see evidence for that. That's not based on evidence. You might have seen from some channels. I saw people forwarding me things from some Telegram channels. I'm not going to say who they were or their names or anything, but they had a whole story built on nothing about how the Iranian skies were penetrated by the Israelis. There's no evidence of that. There's no footage of all the footage of Israeli hits on the ground were also from drones. And then the stuff that the Americans said they did with their B-2s, even that is pretty sketchy. I think, it could be that some people don't even believe the B-2s even flew over Iran. Maybe the whole thing was concocted, but maybe they did. Maybe they flew in and maybe the Iranians didn't attack them. Maybe they were just focusing on getting their radar profile for the next round. So there's a lot of things that happened here that um, are hyped and designed to hype Israel and make Israel seem completely unpredictable, completely dominant. Like they have all this intelligence and they can reach out and kill whoever they want, whenever they want. And that's assassination. And then on the Iran side, they're building air defense and they're building missiles that can hit. They launch them from Iran and they have precise targeting and they destroy their targets in Israel, regardless of what air defense the Americans have put there. And the Americans and the Israelis, even together, they have some air defense. Again, they have air defense to defend against rockets from Gaza so that Israelis can have a normal life while they're genociding the Palestinians. That's the point of the Iron Dome. It's to protect against rockets from Gaza. Rockets from Gaza are not big payloads, and they're not, um, hypersonic or precision. I mean, they're rocket. They really are just rockets. And the Israelis want to have a normal life while they commit genocide, and the Iron Dome is for that. But if you have the Iranian, the scientific military industrial complex of a country of 90 million people, and they're doing missile technology, which they have been developing since the 1980s, well, then that's a different. And the Americans focus on they don't focus on air defense. Why would you focus on air defense? America lives on the other side of the ocean. There's nobody that bombs America. And the Israelis have this air defense that's mainly about defending against rockets from Gaza and maybe a little bit of rockets from Lebanon. And so the specialties of the military industrial complexes of these countries are built based on what they do and what their needs are. And the Americans are out there dominating the world with air power. They don't need air defense. They need air offense. They want to go and bomb with impunity. And for the most part, no one dares to stop them. The Israelis want to commit genocide. The Israelis want to um, they want to commit assassinations. They want to commit high profile assassinations of leaders. They want to make sure that nobody in the region around them has leaders that they can look to. That's what they want to do. They want to try to kill leaders so that any leader that could have a following is fairly quickly killed. That's the Israeli way. That's what Israel's about. So you now have this war. You have the combatants. They've had one round of war, and there's going to be more. And the Israelis have already said they're going to look to assassinate the leader, the Ayatollah Khamenei, this 86-year-old leader of a religion that has as its primary belief system that martyrdom is, uh, a really high value. But they're going to assassinate him because that's what they do, and that's their mentality. And they're going to find some tricky way, commercial drones, pagers. They're going to find some trick, and they're going to try to assassinate more Iranians. And the Iranians, meanwhile, are going to continue. They've probably very systematically studied what went wrong in terms of their air defense. They also know now about infiltration and the kinds of networks that are that were so effective in the initial days of assassinations. They're rolling those up. They're probably trying to plug the gaps in their air defense, and they're probably fixing any offensive issues that they may have seen with their missiles and their drones, and they're restocking. And they're probably, from what I've seen, shopping in China in particular. China has, as people may have seen when they watched the India-Pakistan war, um, China has fighter aircraft and bombers, and they have technology that also is going to transform the next war. If the Americans do try to fight China, there's all kinds of things the Chinese have now that, they have like some giant plane that coordinates drone swarms. They have a plane that opens a bay door and hundreds of drones swarm out of it. I mean, yeah, so science fiction. And the Iranians, that's where the Iranians are. That's where the Iranians are headed. And that's the kind of thing the Iranians are working on right now. And you may have seen a female, a bunch of women graduates from one of the high tech institutes in Iran, and they were holding up signs saying, we're ready to fight for the nation. And Iran does have high participation of women in the workforce and in science and technology too. So yeah, I do think that the Israelis are likely to attack Iran again. I think they're going to try to do one of these assassinations. Assassination will be a part of it because it's the Israelis. I don't, people said that because the American attack was so telegraphed and so tokenistic, and because they made so much of it to try to say they weren't going to follow up, that the next war the Israelis are going to do by themselves. No, they're not. You guys, they're not. Anything the Israelis do, the Americans will be a part of. When the Israelis want to be rescued, the Americans will come to the rescue. When the Israelis demand it, the Americans will do it. The Americans on the Israeli side, the Americans are restocking such as they can the bombs and interceptors and everything that Israel has. The thing is, what's happening with the American arsenal, the arsenal of democracy, is that it really is getting to the point of decisions having to be made between, do we use these against Russia, or do we use these against Iran, or do we save these for the coming war with China? And production is humongous. The principal American industry is military industry, but it's finite nonetheless. And the the countries they're fighting now are big countries. Russia is big, Iran is big. They produce weapons as well. They produce ammunition as well. They produce drones as well. And trying to outmatch the production of now these two, and then with China in the background, we are reaching, we are reaching, we're not there, but we can now start to imagine a situation where difficult decisions have to be made about what to give up. And Israel will always be the last thing to be given up, because I've talked about the joint ruling class before. This is not the US telling Israel what to do, or using Israel, or Israel using the US. This is a fully integrated group that has different priorities, different ideas about what the best thing to do is at different times. And the thing that they all want to do now is genocide. And they all want to do genocide against the Palestinians. They all want to do genocide against Syrians and Lebanese and Iranians. And that is their highest priority. Fighting Russia is another one. And eventually fighting China is the big one. But they're not going to get to China at this rate. But the next round of the Iran war is very likely coming. Probably not this week, but a lot happened last week, so who knows? Until then, hang in there. I think that's it for now, and I'll see you in the next one.